Well, welcome to the Composable DXP with Uniform Bootcamp course, lesson number 2, Intro to DXP, the DXP Dilemma, today presented by Tim Bennix. He's back. He's the Principal Developer Advocate at Uniform. If you want to learn more about him, just watch the interview in the introduction section of this course on headlesscreator.com. All right, with that said, Tim, welcome. I'm going to let you take over, and if anybody has questions, I'll jump in and we'll go from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marcelo. All right, everybody. Happy Friday, as Marcelo said. Let's kick this off. So today, this is Bootcamp Lesson 2, and I want to be talking about the dilemma of the DXP. And of course, if you don't know what DXP is, go back to Lesson 1, so you get to learn all about it. And so basically, if we're talking about DXP, even if we have older systems or newer systems, how you set them up and how your stakeholders work together can actually kind of limit how smooth everything will run out. And so let's go to the slide and let's have a look. So basically, let's start with a statement, right? So effective digital delivery demands collaboration between development, design, and digital marketing. And you might be thinking, Tim, yeah, that's kind of Captain Obvious there, right? You kind of have to work together to be effective. Yes, you do. And you kind of often see that doesn't really happen. And that is generally the case because of how the architecture of your DXP has been set up, even in the more modern composed architectures. And that's the issue I want to talk about today. So you get a bit more clarity on how these things work and how to avoid it, right? And so what I want to talk about is mainly stakeholders. Let's start with that. Because in a digital experience platform, we're not only talking about the tools, the headless CMSs, the front ends, the things you connect together, but you actually have lots of stakeholders that make this thing a success, right? So you have your product owners. They are generally on the brand side. They know exactly what the product is that they make, and they tend to prioritize things to do for the development team, making sure they align with business values, things like that. That's a very important stakeholder in the success of a digital experience platform. Then we have people like business analysts who are amazing at speccing out user stories and user journeys and working with the product owner to actually make sure that these stories are mature enough so the developers get to work on them. And then, like, we have a bunch of those, right? So also we have marketers, and marketers make sure that the story is told, the right story, and that people can actually enjoy that story, get connected to the brand, and then maybe buy something. And then we have the developers that actually have to like tool it all together. And after that, you need to analyze your data and see if what you did was correct. And if not, you go back to the PO and the whole cycle goes again. And of course, we have the truth, or how do you say, the trusty content editors, because without them, that content is never there. And you know what? This is just a small group. There's probably many more people that could fit in here. And I wanted to talk about these because if these all work together really well, effectively, with the tech that you have chosen in your architecture, you will have a much more easy way to have success in your digital delivery pipeline. And so you also, of course, all these stakeholders have to work well with your CMS, but maybe also with personalization. And they all have something to say about personalization, but then in a different area, right? The developer might build it. The product owner might know your personas or your intents. The business analyst has to write it all out. And so they all have something to say, and they all need to be in these tools. And then you have commerce, you have search, and that fits for all of those things. And so what you'll see is that you have the stakeholders and the systems that have to work together. And so basically, the architecture that you set up when you get going will really be able to stall your digital pipeline. And let's go back a little bit to what we used to have last week or 2 weeks ago about our monolith and our composed architectures, because they both suffer from these issues, right? It's not only, hey, the old school monolith will have these issues. No, like the composed architectures might have the same and maybe even worse. So let's talk about monolith and what is really hard when using these. And generally, they are pretty expensive licensing wise, and they're not super flexible. Well, they are flexible if you stay within the bounds of the monolith, but if not, it becomes pretty hard. And by poor end user experience, what I generally mean is the ability for front end developers, for example, to do accessibility or performance or SEO tuning, things like that. And the time to market could be quite slow if you go slightly off the path of the default accelerator that these systems give you. And you really need specific vendor specialists to be able to actually build out these systems, right? You cannot just hire anyone and say, hey, go into this ecosystem that's been existing for 20 years and just deal with it. So all those things, it's a challenge for getting to work together, right? And they generally do not have a super good omni-channel delivery strategy, because they might not have headless, or they might have a little bit of headless, and then it's not really an easy way to get that going. And then because of the way that these systems tend to be set up, they won't be taking advantage of all the new modern development tools that you have. And because of this, you see quite often that the monolithic suite stays there as kind of a CMS, and then the front end is a separated thing, and they build like an API layer in between. Like, what if you didn't have to do that and it was already in place? That would be much, much nicer, right? And so they won't be able to take advantage of the ever-changing nature of the composed world that we live in. And of course, it's single origin, and that is pretty hard to scale, because just imagine scaling MySQL servers, right? Those kind of things, that's just hard. And this single origin kind of needs the brain of everything. And so if there's lots of people calling that, it will create a queue. And so those are kind of the disadvantages in your architecture of monolithic suites that give you problems later on when you have to work together to get the best thing for every stakeholder in that DXP. But when you go to this new fancy composed way of working, you have different problems, but with the same kind of outcome, right? Imagine you're thinking, okay, we're going to do a greenfield project, and we have all these different parts, and we have to put them together. There's lots of choices to make, right? You have to think about, okay, I have some commerce, I need a CMS, I need some marketing stuff for emailings, I need CRM, I need personalization, I need DAM. And then you look at the field of what you can choose from, and it's insane. There's too many of all of those, and they all kind of need to fit together. And that's a challenge. And if you don't choose the right ones, you'll have problems later on. And integration is actually really complex between these. And so how do you orchestrate them? That's quite hard, because think about, let's say, okay, I'll have an headless CMS, but I need digital asset management as well, and I need commerce. Well, there's many ways you can go about this, but the way that we tend to see is that people use a headless CMS, use an integration feature into the headless CMS to push in the headless commerce, and also use an integration to push in the headless DAM system. But what happens if you need to change the CMS or something somehow doesn't work? You've created a really tight coupling in these systems, and scaling them individually, and then which API SLI is most important, and it gets pretty hard, right? And so that's hard to do, complexity in integration and orchestration. And then what you see is that most of the time these new modern composed systems are quite developer focused. IT is very happy with them because it's all, we speak data to each other. That works. But then if you are a stakeholder that does not speak in data, but needs a drag and drop interface or something like that, or what you see is what you get like thing, it basically just doesn't work. And we quite often hear the thing where a website is finished, and a month after, the marketing wants to do a campaign. And on that campaign, they need a couple of products. They need data from a global data set for legal, and they need local data with images from a shoot. And they need some personalization because maybe you like women's shoes more than men, so you need to do something with that. Well, what then often happens is like, okay, we have all these headless systems, all the things are there. How do I now get one page on there that's new that didn't exist? Well, you're going to have to call the developer and say, can you query all these things for me, put them on a page, and that's the work then, right? But quite often the developer says, I don't have time. I'm already working on other features, version 1.1 of the site. Didn't we build you a flexible system? Well, no, you didn't. Because for the developers, it's super flexible. They're very happy, but all the other stakeholders cannot really work in it. And that's quite challenging, right? And so that stalls your digital pipeline. And you didn't even know that you did that because you were so happy it was all composed.
And real
Right. And
quick, it
so,
almost feels, Tim, real quick, it almost
yeah,
feels
sure.
like by doing all that in integrating into the CMS itself, it almost feels like it's a monolith of multiple vendors almost, right? Like
Yep,
it's tightly coupled now.
exactly. And the funny thing is, when you make a monolith of all these different vendors, it actually becomes more complicated than when you had an official monolith, because they all have different SLAs, they have different contracts, they have different support systems. And the one thing I personally enjoyed a lot working with monoliths is if it's broken, I point the finger,
One POC, yep.
right? They fix it.
Right.
In this case, who do you point the finger to? The agency that helped you integrate them all? Maybe the system itself? Maybe
Right.
the webhooks in between are not correct. I don't know. Serverless functions somewhere. So creating something that's tightly coupled like that, it gets hard to orchestrate, but it's also hard organizationally, right?
Yep, makes sense.
Yeah. And so based on what all these things is like, okay, we now all the technology is maturing, all the stakeholders are maturing, and we now know, okay, let's go compost. And then you ask an agency or you look internally and you make some decisions, generally not based on the value that you need, but on the system that you